We'll be looking at your homework questions, and right now we're going to be starting your notes. And in your notes, if you please turn to lesson 6, using rates. And our key thing, we want to interpret unit rates as slope. Remember, these two things are exactly the same or equal if it is a proportional relationship and you go through 0, 0. We are going to look again at your tables, graphs, and equations to make sure you're understanding those. So, working with rates. It says most people earn money by working. The amount of money that people are paid varies. Some are paid by the hour, others earn a yearly salary, and how often people are paid varies. Some people might be paid weekly, some people be paid monthly. It says, how could you compare incomes of two workers based on their paycheck? So what I would like you to do right now, I'm going to pause the video. I want you to discuss this with your shoulder partner. How could you compare the income of two workers based on the paycheck? As we pause the video, one of the things that some of you might be saying is that we could compare if we change it to how many hours or dollars they work per hour. We could compare it as how many dollars per week they make. Or you could sometimes compare it as how many dollars per year. It says, how could a worker find out how much he is earned for a certain time? And again, we would need to know the number of hours or the number of weeks you've worked, or in this case, how much you're getting paid per year to find that certain amount. So it says we will be working with ratios to find all of these answers as we look at this lesson. Using rates. Lacey works as a temporary employee. Last week, she worked 20 hours and earned a total of $300. We are working, it says. We are going to use this information to find out how much more, to find out more about her pay rate. So, first thing we want to write is her pay ratio is the pay to the hours worked. If we look at that, that means this week, Lacey earned 35 hours. She worked 35 hours. Using that ratio, we want to write and solve a proportion. So what do we know the proportion was? The proportion was 20 hours is equal to, and if we are looking at it, so that's our hours. So we don't want that in our numerator. We want to put $300, the pay, for 20 hours. That is going to be equal to 35 hours. And here, this is what we don't know. This is our X, we might say. Now, a couple ways of doing this. Could we find our unit rate? We could take 300 and divide it by 20. So I'd like you to do that right now. If we do that, our unit rate is going to be $15 per hour. And if we have just worked for 35 hours, we are going to take 35 hours times the $15. So I'm going to pause the video. Please put this in your calculator. 15 times 35, which gives us a solution of $525. Now, when you look at this proportion, if you think about our word of the week from last week, proportion, you also, if you remember last year, you could have solved it this way, where you cross-multiply. And you would have had 20x is equal to, and now you would multiply 35 times 300. Now, this one gives us an equation, and if we have our equations, we know from solving equations, 20x is equal to 1,500. And when we divide both sides by 20, you still get 525. So you can find your unit rate and multiply it, or you can use proportions. So both ways work. Make sure you have it written down. I'll pause this if you need to. It says, well, next week she works a total of 40 hours. Write and solve a different proportion to find her total. So this time we could say, well, what was our unit rate? $15 per 1 hour is equal to 40 hours. And now we are trying to find this amount, X. The easiest way to do it is if we have that unit rate. And so now we are going to be multiplying 40 times 15 on your calculator. It's $15. And we should end up with a total of $600. It makes sense, we should be getting more money for working more hours. On that next page down in your notes, it says we want to use a ratio from earlier to find what she makes per hour. And our ratio for earlier is that she makes, if we found this one, we were taking $300 and we were dividing it by 20 hours, which came out to be our unit rate of $15 per hour. So a lot of times you might write it this way. Sometimes you're going to see it written out $15 per hour. This is called, if we are thinking about this, our unit rate. We are talking about that. So this is our unit rate because it is her rate per 1 hour. It says if Lacey normally works 8 hours in one day, we can use her unit rate to find out how much she usually makes in a day. So in this case, we are looking at $15 per 1 hour times, if you think about science this year, 8 hours. So if we're using our units, we're going to cancel our units, and 8 times 15 does give us $120. And remember, this is 1 day. So we're going to put that unit down here, so 120 per day. It says if we were going to make a table or graph or equation to model this, how would the unit rate be used in each of those? So if we wanted to make a table, how do we show the unit rate in a table? If we are trying to show this, how much money she's making, if our table went by days, and then we would have salary, we would have to go 0, 0, 1, 120, 2, what happens next in our table? Well, we should continue to add 120 a day, right? So it should be at 240. So how does this unit rate show in our table? It's what we add for each day. How would we show that in a graph? In a graph, if we are looking at our y and x axis, we would start at 0, 0. At 1, it would want to be at 1 at 120. And so what we could say on our graph, and 2 would be at 240. And so what we could say on a graph is, how do we see that unit rate? As you move 1 unit to the right, the dependent variable goes up by, in this case, $120. And how would we see it in our equation? So now we want to write an equation. And keeping in mind from last night's homework, it's y equals, and we want to be thinking unit rate times x. And in our case, if we are looking at that per day, y equals 120x. This is per day. What would it have been for our hourly one? Y equals 15x. So if you were getting paid by the hour or day, that's what would be the difference. And again, if you need to pause this, we'll pause the video so you can make sure you write that down and get all of that filled in your notes so that you have table, graph, and equation. And we'll wait for you. On the top of the next page, it says we now want to take a look at making a table and a graph. So if we are taking a look at this, our independent variable in our case is going to be our time that we worked. And what was our time in? If we're looking at this one, our time is in hours. And then our unit rate is the amount of money we're being paid. So a lot of times, you're going to see the word amount. And in this case, we're probably going to see dollars here. And this is our amount, so we want to have our labels. Again, the y, and it is our y, but if we are looking at y and x, x is going to be in hours, Y is going to be our dollars. So if we are looking at that same situation, after 0 hours, we had $0. At 1 hour, we had 15. 2 hours, we should have 30. Next, we should have 45, and please fill in those last two. Over here, we want to label this, so we have time in hours, and we now want to plot our points. At 1, it was at 15, at 2, it's at 30, 3 was at 45, 4 should be at 60, and so we should finish filling this in with 60 and 75. We now want to make, after we made our table, we now want to graph this, so please use a straight edge starting at 0, 0, and we want to extend this. And at this point, unlike yesterday where the snow ended after 12 hours, this one continues going, and it keeps going on and on and on. So we are looking at those two. And again, I'll pause this if you need to make sure you have this all written in. Well, now we want to make an equation. The last equation we had would have been y equals 15x. It says, how can we use the unit rate in her pay for 3 hours, or 6.5 hours, or 2.75? And the key thing is if she works 3 hours, 6.5, or 2.75, and we want to find out her pay, we're going to take and multiply her pay rate, which in our case was $15 per hour, times the hours. So if we are looking at that, we want to think about our equation. It's going to be the amount that we earn is going to equal our pay rate, which is usually our unit rate, times the hours worked. So her equation is going to be y equals 15x. A lot of times they don't show this multiplication in here, so usually we're going to write it as y is just equal to 15x, and that means 15 times. So to generalize this, we can say that for any proportional relationship, that we're going to put the dependent, right, that's our y, the dependent variable y equals, we're going to put our slope, or in this case, our unit rate, times our independent variable. And if you can get this in your head for setting up equations, it's going to make your life much easier. Dependent is always equal to the slope or unit rate times the independent. And this is always equal when we are taking a look at that. On the top of the next page, we are now asked to compare our rates. If we are comparing our rates, it says Joseph earns as a temporary employee. He's paid $5.13 for 38. Find his unit rate. So I'm going to pause the video and have you do that. Find the unit rate. Then we're going to fill in the table. So pause this and do this on your own. Try it. At this point, you should have found $13.50. How do we put that in our table? 0, 0, 1, $13.50. And we're going to graph each of these. Remember, her rate was $15. So when we are at 1, we should be at $13.50, just a little below hers, right? At 2, we're at 27. Hers was 30. So he's making just a little less all the time. $40.50 is going to be right above that. Here we're at $54. So will they ever catch up? No. He's always going to be making, if we are looking at this line, he's always going to be making less. It says, how do the rates of pay affect what you see on the graph? It affects the slope of the line. Joseph's line is not as steep since his rate is lower. So we are now going to look at that bottom slide to fill in your notes. As you look at this, it says how many miles per gallon. Write an equation And then we want to use this to find 5 columns. So again, pause the video and watch what we're going to take a look at. After pausing it, you should have